Yeah, Gods and Golems was pretty amazing. Wow, I've got some great ideas for what we'll do with the Golem next. Uh, it's just you can tell when you really have something, something that's pretty amazing. The response we got was just humongous. Of course, we were at the School of Cinema Arts, so that might be part of it. But in reality, it just seemed like people, even the people that weren't in the cinema school, were just kind of taken with our idea. Um, it's easy to get on one level, and then if on a kind of a superficial level, and then if you want to go deeper, there's a lot there. So it really, it, I think this was a really important step for us at Poor Late Pig Studios. One, it shows our chops. I can make anything. I think that's pretty obvious. And my animator and business partner, Greg, he can animate anything. So, and Kai Pfeiffer of Harebrained Media, apparently he can do any type of music. So, I mean, kind of the sky's the limit. So, we've got this startup, Poorly Pig Studios, and we're looking into doing more stop motion fusion, if that makes any sense. We're not doing directly stop motion, but we're taking stop motion and we're kind of turning it on its head, and we're mixing other things in with it to give it kind of a richer experience. Give people a richer experience with stop motion. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't want to limit us to stop motion. We do a lot of other stuff, but that's where I really love to make puppets. That's what I'm really good at. It's what I love to do. Working with USC to put this installation on was very interesting. It took like 6 months just to figure out how I was gonna go about making the puppet, what I was gonna do. I used foam latex for the first puppet, and then I just used mask latex for the second puppet, which was a cheaper alternative. It was easier to work with, and it wasn't as heavy because it was a hollow mask. And I got that idea off of maskmakers.com or monstermakers.com, something like that, where they had a tutorial on how to make a Halloween mask. And so instead of just making the front part for just the Halloween mask out of mask latex, I made the whole head and shoulders out of mask latex. And it was just a hollow shell. And originally I filled it with foam to kind of keep it in place while it dried. And then after it dried, I just pulled the extra foam out. So it was really light. It worked way better. Um, uh, using joints and understanding how those joints are put together and those tension springs, right? It's very different from what I've done before with other stop motion puppets. Usually I do a wire frame because you can do anything with wire frame, right? And it's up to the animator. Mum's the word. The sky's the limit with movement as as an animator with a wire frame. And then so it was a very interesting experience using a jointed puppet, especially only a partially jointed puppet, because the final golem was half jointed and half wire. And then, like in the middle, he was a semi-wire. He was semi-jointed using wire in between. It was very odd. I made a spine for gosh sake, and that's kind of the wire and jointed part, because it would rely on the joints. It would rest on the joints, but the wire is what gave it the movability, right? It has to be malleable, and so the jointed pieces worked really, really well for the legs and the hips for the most part. It really added a lot when I made it so that you could twist the legs, because originally it was the joints just went back and forth like so. There were no ball joints. I didn't make any. I don't have the skill to make giant ball joints. I would get that machine, but we didn't have the money, and so um, Mike Pfeiffer welded plates together, and we put tension springs in them, and they were just kind of straightforward joints. They just kind of did this, right? Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, easy to work with in a lot of ways. But what really helped is I replaced the thigh, the femur piece, with a piece that twisted. and that added a ton of stability. I think I'll do that again in the future. It worked really well. Now the puppet couldn't do like, you know, huge amounts of motion with his legs, but he could walk well enough. And you know, for a puppet that size, holding up its own weight, you know, that's pretty good. I'm pretty excited about that, actually. With the feet, I did a lot of work with the feet. I used Simpson strong ties to actually give it kind of a flat feet. And then bolting it into a wooden stage, just like you do with regular stop motion puppets. We use giant T-nuts. We got them from a climbing wall place, rock climbing place. So we just used these giant T-nuts, and we bolted him straight to the stage. And then the idea, I kind of sandwiched the T-nuts in between two pieces of wood so it wouldn't fall out, right? Because usually T-nuts, they're kind of, for climbing, they're up on a wall, so you're pulling from the inside, right? So if you like this, you're pulling from this side, and the T-nut would be right here. So this, originally we had trouble with the T-nut popping out, which I was anticipating. And so one day in a dream, since that's where I tend to deal with most of my problem solving, I was like, oh, I'll just sandwich it in between two pieces. And it worked stunningly. You know, it was a lot of problem solving, and that's what I'm good at. Besides making puppets, is I am a problem solver. Background in engineering. You know, my dad growing up, he was a problem solver. My brother's a problem solver. You know, that's what I do. I solve problems. And let me tell you, the idea of coming up with a puppet, a freestanding puppet that walks on its own, right? That's a problem. And it was one that I stressed over a lot, and I worked with a lot. Greg worked with me too. You know, when you make puppets, your animator, or if you animate yourself, you have to understand the limitations of the puppet, and you have to work with it, and you have to develop its personality kind of based on like how it can move. And so you have to really feel the puppet. Now, Greg, as an animator, really came a long way, because originally he was trying, because he's used mostly wire frame puppets, small wire frame puppets, you know, in the past. That's pretty much what I make for him, and that's what he's made for himself. And so moving from a wire frame puppet to a jointed puppet, it was really interesting to watch that transition go on as he was working with it, because originally he's like, oh, I'm going to move this like a wire frame puppet, and he bent the pelvis. And I was like, oh no, you know, and we were lifting weights because we were like, oh, we got to be strong enough to move this puppet. And so Greg, not knowing his own strength, went, oh, oops. So, I mean, we had a bit of, there was kind of a learning curve there. But once Greg, it was a switch to kind of watch. He just kind of flipped his switch, and he was like, oh, and then he kind of, it was more subtle movement, and you had to understand that you had to like step on the feet and move the whole thing with your body, because it's such a big puppet. So like he couldn't just like use his arms to bend it, to move it, because the tension springs add a lot of pressure, so it's hard to move. That's how it stays up, right? And so the idea of like pushing his whole body into it and moving the puppet, not only is he animating the puppet and breathing his own life into it, but he's moving its body with his body. And I think that was pretty amazing to watch, actually, watching Greg really just like get into moving the puppet and kind of becoming one with the puppet. And so, you know, if you have a really good animator, which I'm lucky to have, he just really works with the idiosyncrasies of what you've made. He doesn't even try to hide them. He tries to incorporate them into what's going on. And Greg did a wonderful job doing that. It was really an interesting progression, going from a teeny tiny puppet to a great big puppet. So I'd say, all in all, it was a pretty wonderful experience. You know, as artists and doing stuff outside the box, you always have a lot of red tape to deal with. You have to keep being like, no, this is what I want. No, this is what I want. No, this is what I want. The nature of the piece required, like absolutely required, that we have it in a public space. That's all there was to it. If it had not been in a public space, you would not be able to tell if the puppet was this big, or full size like it was. I mean, we did some test shots with it where it was just the puppet, and it was extremely obvious to us right away that if you don't have a body to see it with, you don't know how big it is, right? And that's part of it. It's part of the piece. And honestly, the final product of the video is a nice remnant of what we did, but in reality, the piece itself was really was really being right there with the puppet in that moment, feeling the feeling with your body, like, oh, what is this? Oh, because you really identify with it. We had people who we'd been talking to about this project, and they finally said, oh, now I get it. Now that it's here, now that it's large, now that I'm experiencing it, I get it. Whereas before, I never could really understand what you were talking about. And the reason they couldn't understand what we were talking about before is because they didn't have the bodily connection, right? That was missing. All you had was the theory. You didn't understand the experience. And the experience is really key, in that moment in time where you have that experience from a body to another body. And that's what this puppet was. It was another body. And, sometimes people are like, oh, we want a small maquette. We want this. It's like, no, you're really not going to get the sense with a small maquette. It just doesn't translate. You have to experience it. And so sometimes you have to, we knew with all of our being that this would work. We knew that this was going to be a feeling, a bodily experience. We knew that it was going to be a hit because we usually do pieces that are pretty well accepted. Once they're up and set up, people really love them. And so we knew it, and we pushed for it, and we wouldn't say no, and we persevered. And it really paid off. It really paid off because people were like, oh, this is it? Oh, I get it. And you could see people identifying with the puppet. You could watch them experience it. And that a lot of that stuff is missed on camera because it's from the Golem's perspective, and he doesn't see those subtleties, right? Because we're going so fast compared to him. So it was just a pretty amazing experience all in all. We persevered. We got what we wanted. Amazing. And, now we're just cleaning up. We're moving things back to the apartment here in Koreatown. And we are getting ready to set up some other stuff for Port Pig Studios. We have some good ideas, and we're going to keep going. So I guess that's my reflections of Gods and Golems' first steps. So